Hey guys, Zaronce here with my first ever video guide, so take it a little easy on me. Today we're going to look at Unholy Death Knight, and we're specifically going to look at Unholy Death Knight in Battlegrounds. I've noticed that for a long time a lot of the video guides focused on PvP are mainly focused on Arena, so I want to create a guide for people like myself who mostly just derp around in Battlegrounds and have that different perspective on the game than an Arena player might. So first off, we're going to look at talents. So one of the cool things about Unholy Death Knight is that you really have a lot of different talent options. There's a lot of different builds you can use. There's a lot of tiers where the best option isn't so clear cut. So this is my general build. This is what I run for most games. It works well for me, but at the end of the day, the best talent setup is going to be the one that you're most comfortable with, the one that boosts the playstyle that you enjoy. But with that being said, my recommendations would be right here. So we'll go through tier by tier. So this first tier of talents, I really think all the options are good. The difference is minimal. You can really go with whichever one best suits your playstyle. I enjoy All Will Serve. It gives good passive damage, range damage. It's unpeelable, it's tough to kite. It's just a good around passive damage increase. And on top of that, with a lot of the damage caps that are around nowadays with the introduction of Shadowlands, it's just another target to eat cleave damage so that important damage isn't going into yourself or your teammates. So it's just a good all-around option. It adds that screen clutter as well if they have nameplates on, makes it harder to target friendly totems, friendly players, flags, things like that. So it's just a good all-around option. Clawing Shadows, I would rank just below it. It's another strong option. It's a good way to burst wounds from range. It's good passive damage. It just replaces Scourge Strike. I wouldn't say it's passive damage, but it's a good passive boost to damage that you already be doing. Infected Claws is just a little bit below that. It's good wound generation. Lets you spend more globals on Scourge Strike, more runes on Scourge Strike instead of on Festering Strike. Not a bad option, but I still put it below the other two. For the next tier, on Ebb and Fever can be a good option as well. It's good passive damage. My problem with it is that you end up spending a lot of runes maintaining Virulent Plague, and those are runes that could be better spent putting pressure out with your other spells. That being said, Ebb and Fever is a good option. It's a good spread pressure option. It's a good route option, but I prefer Unholy Blight. Unholy Blight is a great burst cooldown. It's a short cooldown. It adds another disease to your repertoire, and it gives you that increased minion damage, which is great when you pair it with Dark Transformation for some good single target bursts. I used to be a big fan of Ebb and Fever until I tried out Unholy Blight, and now I can't see myself playing without it. It's really a great option. For this tier, tier 3, mostly our CC tier, I highly recommend Asphyxiate. I think that the other options really aren't that good for regular Battlegrounds. Now that being said, there could be situations where these other two really come in handy. If you have a group of friends that you play with consistently, let's say you've got a lot of rogue friends or other classes with stuns, you might potentially go out of Asphyxiate. You could do Grip of the Dead to keep people in smoke bombs. You could do Death's Reach to get more consistent grips. If your rogue buddy's always standing next to you and he's ready to kidney whoever you grip, Death's Reach can be a good talent for a setup like that. But overall, I recommend Asphyxiate. Even if you are playing with a rogue, he can kidney a kill target. You can Asphyxiate a healer because it's got that 20-yard range on it. I would pretty much never swap out of this for Battlegrounds. Next tier is pretty much between Pestilent Pustules and Harbinger of Doom. Soul Reaper, as it's built right now, is more of a raiding talent where you can consistently use it on an enemy who's going to be above 35% health for an extended period of time. Unfortunately, with how bursty the meta is right now and how much health slingshots, it's really difficult to get good uses out of Soul Reaper. Overall, it's a damage decrease from Scourge Strike unless you can guarantee that after 5 seconds your target's going to be below 35% health, which right now you don't know that. I mean, the health slingshots back and forth all the time. You can't rely on Soul Reaper to proc, and so for that reason I would recommend going with the other two options. I recommend Pestilent Pustules because it helps with rune generation in a way that Harbinger of Doom doesn't as much. It helps make sure that you can spend more runes on your rune spenders as opposed to your runic power spenders, and most of your damage will come from your rune spenders. So for that reason, I recommend Pestilent Pustules, but both of these are very close, and you can really go either way. Harbinger of Doom has some nice synergy with Lichborn, so that you can build up 2 proc Lichborn and then get 2 free heals onto yourself. So this one really comes down to preference. I personally prefer Pestilent Pustules, as I said, but you could really go either way. For this next tier, Spell Eater is the talent to take. It is the way to go. I don't really find myself in need of the movement increase from Wraithwalk too often, especially if you're an engineer and you have rocket boots. In Battlegrounds, there's so many targets that you can often find someone to sit on. If one of your targets gets away, you just swap to someone else and you keep your damage up. Not that Wraithwalk or Death Pact are bad necessarily. Death Pact especially is pretty good in a bursty meta like this, especially if you're solo and you can't rely on a healer. But it's just with all of the spell cleaves out there right now, all of the Shadow Priests and other Death Knights, Half-Locks you'll see a lot in randoms, and just with how high damage is, how high spell damage is, boomies, things like that. Spell Eater is amazing. It's an extra 5 seconds of magic CC immunity. It's a bigger shield that makes it harder to break through. It's just a great talent. I highly recommend it as the only talent to ever look at on this row. This row also really only has one talent, Unholy Pact. It's amazing. It's great cleave, not just from the Unholy Pact that it creates with the flaming chains or whatever, but it also increases your pet damage cleave. So it's just great extra damage, and that 5% strength increase is just the cherry on top. So for the final row, there's a couple options you can go here, and it's pretty much based on how you want to build your character. If you want sustained damage, shorter CD burst, or longer CD bigger burst, I recommend Army of the Damned because it just gives you that many more chances to use Apocalypse, which is just a great spell. It's so satisfying to use. It deals a ton of damage, and it adds a little oomph to the undead minions that you summon when you use Apocalypse. So I highly recommend Army of the Damned. I think the next best option would be Unholy Assault. It's great to pair with Apocalypse as well. It's the same cooldown. It deals upfront damage, adds 4 wounds, and then you can immediately Apoc for an extra 3k damage or whatever. So in those 2 globals you deal a ton of damage, and then you get that big haste buff when your minions come up, which is a really strong combo. Summon Gargoyle I don't think is as strong. It's great if you're just going for that big one-shot burst, a 30-second opportunity to kill everyone, but I prefer more of the sustained options, either sustained burst or just sustained damage. So moving on, we'll look at the PvP talents. Raise Abomination is the lock. You will always run this talent. It's so good. It's great for casting on a group of enemies that's far away to get your plague up on all them, and then popping Unholy Blight and running through their melee so that you have their whole team dotted up. It pairs well with Army of the Damned because Army of the Damned reduces the cooldown. Now, it doesn't reduce the cooldown by 5 seconds when you pop Razor Bomb, because Razor Bomb is a much shorter cooldown than Army of the Dead, but it does decrease it still. It decreases it by about a second. So these pair very well together. Razor Bomb also adds Festering Wounds to your target, which is good for spending more runes on Scorch Strike. And overall, it's just an amazing talent. You will always run this. Never change this talent out. The next one, Necrotic Aura, you'll pretty much always run as well. It's amazing. It's pretty much an 8% damage increase on your target, or all targets within 8 yards of you. It's a very good talent. I would never swap this out. But it's this next one that is a little more up for debate, but still there's pretty much only 2 options. I prefer Life and Death. I just started running this one over the one that I will mention in a second, but Life and Death is great for punishing dispels. It gives a little extra passive healing when targets with your wounds up are healed, and your kill target is pretty much always going to have wounds on them, so you're dealing damage to them that makes healers pump heals into them because they're taking damage, and you're eating up 10% of that healing, so you can keep your health at a sustainable level throughout the fight. But additionally, the dispel protection is great. It's not really that punishing when your diseases get dispelled because it's so easy for you to put them all back up. But what's important is that this makes dispelling your plague erupt for 400% damage. So this can crit for over 4k damage and then you instantly put your diseases right back on them. Best is when they try to do like an AoE dispel during Unholy Blight, because literally the second that they dispel, your diseases are all right back on them, and they all, like, their whole team just took 4k damage. And that's AoE damage. So, you know, if they're stacked up and they dispel, it's a ton of damage that goes out. The other option would be Decomposing Aura. This is really great in the current meta because it's so bursty, and this just makes all your bursts so much more dangerous. It also makes your rot that much faster. You know, say you're playing with a Shadow Priest, a Naflock, or a Boomy, or anyone else who has, you know, a lot of damage over time effects. This makes that rot so much more punishing because people are never safe, you know. And something to keep in mind with Decomposing Aura is it decreases max health, but it also decreases current health because it keeps the health percentage the same. So if someone has 70% health, as Decomposing Aura reduces their max health, it will maintain that percentage of health. So actually their current health will be going down as well. That being said, I still recommend Life and Death for Battlegrounds because you'll get a lot of value out of it. So moving on, we'll look at stat weights. So stat weights for Death Knight, we've gone under a little bit of a change with Shadowlands, but they'll still be similar to what you've seen before. So the biggest change with Shadowlands is that there's now diminishing returns with stat weights, or with stats in general, with secondary stats. And so what that means is that once you get over 30% of a stat strictly through rating from gear, you'll start to get less value out of each point of that secondary stat. So the diminishing return is set at 30% from gear. So look at Mastery, for example. I have 37% Mastery. You would think, all right, he's hitting diminishing returns with Mastery. That's not true, because as you can see, I only have 439 rating from gear for Mastery, which gives me 22.5% Mastery. So that's the point. That's what matters, right? So I have that baseline about 15% Mastery built into my spec. That is not affected by diminishing returns. It's only the Mastery that you build on top of that is strictly through rating from gear, right? So I still have about 8% of Mastery to get from gear before I reach diminishing returns. All right, so with that being said, there's pretty much two ways that you can build your DK for PvP. You can go with a balanced option, or you can go with a damage option. They're very similar, it's just the main stat that you go for switches up. So for the balanced option, you want to focus on versatility, and then Mastery, and then haste, and then crit is like way below the other three stats. All three of these stats, haste, mastery, and versatility, are very good for us. Crit doesn't really synergize with our spec very much. It doesn't really bring a lot of value, and so you kind of want to avoid gear with crit on it, but these other three are very strong. For the offensive build, it's very similar. You want to go mastery, versatility, haste, and then crit. In both specs, mastery and verse are much better than haste, which is much better than crit. That being said, there is a certain breakpoint with haste that you want to reach. You want to get about 7% haste. Below 7%, you will find yourself very often rune starved. And while you're still going to be rune starved at different points, that's just part of playing a Death Knight. You're going to have to balance your rune generation with your rune spending. Reaching that 7% haste breakpoint makes everything a lot more fluid. And so some ways that you'll accomplish that is through Enchants. You know, if you can't reach 7% haste just from your gear, throw on a couple of haste enchants just to get to that minor threshold. It's really not difficult to reach, but it does make a difference. And so pretty much the difference between the balanced build and the offensive build is whether or not you include the defensive contribution of versatility in your value of each stat. So the balanced build is just including versatility, the defensive value of versatility, in comparison to the other stats. You'll notice versatility is very high on our list because of the PvP set bonus for trinkets. That 40% extra damage makes a big difference. As you can see, I have 18% verse, so I have 18% extra damage on all my spells. Right, 40% of that, just off the top of my head, is probably 7 or 8% damage flat bonus to everything that you do. So it's very strong. And then when you throw in the defensive benefit, it's an extremely powerful stat. But personally, I go with the offense build. You can see I have Mastery Enchant, Mastery Gem, that Haste Enchant to hit that 7% threshold, double Mastery Rings, but those will probably be replaced moving forward. But then next, we'll look at Enchants. So we already touched on Enchants a little bit. Right, so I have the mastery, enchants and gems, that haste to reach that 7%. But it's important to remember that there's some new enchants that came out with Shadowlands. So first off, don't forget to enchant your gloves with strength. You can throw a boot enchant on that reduces falling damage taken, which is something that will just happen naturally in Battlegrounds. You know, you're jumping all around the map, and you know that little bit of extra distance you can fall before taking damage can make a difference overall. The most contentious option is probably your chest enchant. There's the plus 30 primary stats, which does no longer include stamina, which sucks. And then there's the Eternal Skirmish option, which is a proc effect for your melee attacks. So for single target, Eternal Skirmish is better. Just hands down is better. It's close, but it's better. But in a Battleground where you have multiple targets that are all potentially dotted up, the little bit of extra strength that you get from the 30 stats really starts to make a difference. So for that reason, I go with 30 stats. I think it's better. It's a little bit of extra damage on every single target that you have dotted up, which is going to be a lot of targets. And then for your cloak enchant, I don't think it makes much of a difference. There's a couple different options you can run here. I went with minor speed because Battlegrounds are big, you're running all over the place, and that 3% speed adds up. There's also the leech option, which goes really well with Death Knight. With all of the ways that we have to regain health while staying on the offensive, I think that leech option is good, and I would recommend going with one of those two, but specifically the minor speed increase. And then for your weapon, for your Runeforge, you're going to go with Rune of the Fallen Crusader 90% of the time. Rune of the Apocalypse can be okay. It's got some good utility that goes with it, but overall, I think that the strength bonus from Rune of the Fallen Crusader, along with the 6% max health heal that comes with it, is very powerful. And you'll see in a little bit how we combo this Rune of the Fallen Crusader with some of our other abilities to get a really juicy strength increase for some really big burst damage. Alright, and then next we will look at Covenants. So I think there's two options to go for your Covenant. The big one is between Necrolord and Kyrian. I think that the other two, Venthyr and Nightfey, are very far behind for PvP purposes. I recommend Necrolord over Kyrian. I think Kyrian's good for 1v1, 2v2, more of an arena setup. It's good for survivability. But I think for Battlegrounds, for AoE, for Cleave, you gotta go with Necrolord. I mean, Abomination Limb is such a strong ability. It scales with our mastery. It's so good for Unholy Death Knight. Or any Death Knight, really. It contributes to our Cleave. It allows us to pull people in. It helps us stick to targets. You know, you can use Abomination Limb to pull someone in, and then when they try to escape, you have Death Grip ready, and then when they try to escape again, you know, the internal cooldown on Abomination Limb is done, and it'll just grip them right back. It makes you super sticky. It makes it really hard to peel off you. It synergizes well with Unholy Blight for just dotting everyone. It synergizes well with Unholy Pact for cleaving people down. It's just a great all-around talent, and so that's the path that I recommend. Now for Soulbinds, if you're Kyrian, you want to go with Pelagos. You want that big mastery buff when you pop your ability, and that's pretty much the only option. But for Necrolord, as it stands right now, you can really go with either one. You can go with Plague Divisor Merilith, or you can go with Ameni. Plague Divisor is more of the defensive option. It gives you the shield when you fall below 50% health. It eventually gives you some health regain when you channel Fleshcraft, along with the CC immunity. And if you manage to kill someone and channel Fleshcraft before they release Spirit, you will get a 120 mastery buff, which isn't bad. I prefer Ameni though. I'm more of a damage building centered person. And I think the lead by example, Ameni's power is really strong. Abomination Limb increases your strength by 5%, and it scales with nearby allies, so if you can hit 4 nearby allies, you get a 13% strength increase. Given how many people are in a Battleground and how often you're in a team fight, you will very often get that full benefit, so you'll get 13% strength increase, which if you can time it with Rune of the Fallen Crusader proccing for that 15% strength increase, and then Dark Transformation with Unholy Pact for that 5% strength increase, you can get 33% strength increase on the spot with your burst. I mean, A Bomb Limb is your longest CD burst. It's 2 minutes, which means you can hold all your other burst CDs to pair with Abomination Limb right on the opener to get a 33% strength increase with all of your burst CDs going. And you can just deal a ton of damage. It's really beautiful. So as you're moving down your Soulbind tree, I always try to focus on getting the Potency Conduits. I think the Potency Conduits are a bigger contribution to your damage than any of these potential other options. Those don't really have any, but I mean, the Potency Conduits I think are just bigger damage increases than what you could potentially get otherwise. As far as the defensive options, as I said, I prefer damage-oriented builds. I'd rather kill them before they kill me as opposed to try to outlast them. I mean, you're not a Ret Paladin, you're not a Live Lord, you're relatively squishy in this meta right now. So I try to go for the offensive options. So as far as Soulbinds are concerned, as far as Conduits are concerned, for your Potency Conduits, Eternal Hunger is the best option, hands down. You can also go with Convocation of the Dead for the shorter cooldown on Apocalypse. That's a strong option. Brutal Grasp is a decent option for Cleave. And Lingering Plague is alright. It's kind of undertuned right now, so I don't recommend that. I'd mainly focus on Eternal Hunger and then Convocation of the Dead. For Finesse Conduits, Chilled Resilience is the best option. A shorter cooldown on Icebound Fortitude is amazing. And you know, it's not just the damage reduction, it's the stun immunity that goes along with it. And as you get to higher ranks, you can almost get Icebound down to a 2-minute cooldown, which is just incredible. It's really strong. For your secondary, Finesse Conduit Spirit Drain can be really good for getting extra burst in important situations after you land a kick. Fleeting Wind's not bad, but I find that I don't really need the movement speed increase, so I'd rather go with Spirit Drain. But I don't think you're going to run into many opportunities to take 2 Finesse Conduits, because as I said, I would recommend focusing on just getting the Potency Conduits and getting whatever powers go along with those. But if you do, or say you don't really enjoy the Icebound Fortitude reduced cooldown, then I would probably go Spirit Drain. And for Endurance Conduits, this one's a little more difficult. Insatiable Appetite could potentially be good for increasing your Death Strike healing, but Death Strike is so undertuned right now that it really doesn't heal for that much very often. And so my plan is to go with Hardened Bones to turn Lichborn into a true defensive cooldown, to make me a little tankier in those moments where you're forced to go defensive, pop Lichborn, try to heal yourself out. And so for that reason, I recommend Hardened Bones. Now, the last thing to look at is legendary powers for Death Knights. And so we have a couple options depending on how you want to build your character. There's the Frenzied Monstrosity, which comes out with the World Boss, which will either be next week or the week after. Increases the attack speed and damage of you and your monstrosity by 12%. This is a great option for a burst build and focusing on all the damage that you can deal in a certain window. I think it's a little more tailored for arena with that burst damage aspect and that kill potential aspect, but no matter what, it's an amazing option. A flat 12% damage increase for 15 to 18 seconds every minute is amazing. And that's not even considering the attack speed increase that goes along with it. But my preferred option is Super Strain. I love this legendary. This legendary is amazing. It's so much fun to have in BGs. It's so good for Unholy. And so first off, you see that reduced effectiveness. What that means from what I can gather is that those 2 additional diseases deal 65% of total damage. So the reduced effectiveness is that they deal 35% less damage. But all the secondary effects are still there. They're all the same. And so what I found after using this legendary for a bunch of Battlegrounds now is that it usually accounts for about 10% of my damage. Those extra 2 diseases usually account for about 10% of my damage. On top of that, you get the Runing Power generation from Frost Fever, you get that little bit of Leech from Blood Plague, and Blood Plague scales with our Mastery, which makes it that much better. And so I highly recommend Super Strain. I absolutely love this legendary. I can see myself using this legendary for the rest of the expansion. You know, I absolutely love this thing. I swear by it. Now the next really good legendary is Death's Embrace. This is more of a utility option. combined with Spell Eater, it makes your AMS potentially 24 seconds, which is a very long period of time to just be immune to any magic CC unless they break through your shell. Additionally, it has that heal component. It's very strong. But as I mentioned earlier, I like to build more for damage, and so I go for Super Strain. I absolutely love Super Strain, and the argument between Super Strain and Frenzy Monstrosity pretty much comes down to sustained damage versus burst damage. As you can see from some of my talent options, such as Army of the Damned, I prefer that sustained damage option for consistently dealing good damage, as opposed to every once in a while dealing really strong damage. And then if you're just itching to make a legendary, and you have Soul Ash, leaking out of your bags, you can go for a Reanimated Shambler. It's not great, but it's not horrible. It'll probably be 1 to 3% of your damage in any given battleground. It's totally RNG reliant, which sucks, but when it does proc, if you have burst going, when it procs, you can probably land a kill. It can crit for over 8k damage, but it's just totally RNG. It doesn't proc all that often, but if you're really just itching to make a legendary, that's a good option. Another good option is Deadliest Coil for single target. Increases the duration of Dark Transformation, which is great. Reduces the cost of Death Coil, which is good. The problem with this is that there's a lot of opportunities to really increase your AoE pressure in BGs by using Epidemic, and this doesn't affect that at all. But it's still not a bad option. The thing is, it drops off the last boss of Castle Nathria, which is like, if you're going to go that far in the raid and kill the last boss, you might as well kill the one before him and get Super Strain, which I absolutely love. So that about wraps it up for this video. I guess real quick, we'll just go over your opener for PvP, right? And so the thing about Death Knight, Unholy Death Knight in PvP, is that it takes you a little bit to get your damage going. If someone opens on you, you're behind, because your first 3 globals don't really do damage. It's about setting up your damage. And so the first thing you want to do when you're going into combat is you want to drop your Razor Bomb. You want to get Unholy Blight going. And you want to pop Dark Transformation. Once you do that, you build up some wounds, you pop a Bomb Limb, and then you Apocalypse, so that you can make sure that you have Lead by Example, the strength increase from a many, active when you Apocalypse, so you can get the biggest damage in. Alright, so your quick opening burst is, as you're running in, you drop that, pop Unholy Blight, a Bomb Limb, and then Apocalypse. Right, so right in that opener, it's almost 5k damage. And I didn't even continue damaging. That was just the opening damage that you dealt. So that about wraps up the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to like and or subscribe. If you want to see Death Knight Battlegrounds in action, you can check out my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Zaronce. Leave comments below with any feedback, thoughts, suggestions, any questions that you might have. And other than that, until next time, I'll catch y'all later.